Welcome back to another episode of Unlocking Venture Capital. I'm here today with Daniel Dart. Hi, Daniel. How are you doing?
Doing well. Thanks for having me on.
Awesome. So Daniel is the founder of Rockyard, which is a emerging fund, and I am so excited to talk to him about his journey into venture capital. So Daniel comes from a very unconventional path into VC. So I would love for you to give us a bit about your background and why you're motivated to now do venture.
Yeah, so a little bit about Rockyard Ventures, just kind of to start, and then I'll bring it back up to speed starting at the beginning. It is where a pre-seed and seed stage fund focused on the industrial layer. So think construction, supply chain, manufacturing within the United States, primarily, I would say enterprise or large scale antiquated industries, B2B. So that's kind of the fun. My background is a little bit different. So I never went to undergrad, never graduated a regular high school, spent time homeless, in and out of jail and prison, eventually turning my life around and then going to different universities, London School of Economics first and MIT second. And along the way, kind of just fell in love with the entrepreneurial kind of sector and venture capital as a whole. And so now I'm here and we'll dig in more, but that's a high level.
So coming from this background that you have, going in and out of jail and everything, how did you find
Yep.
raising a fund? How did you tell them who you were? What was that
Oh
first meeting
man,
like?
it's
I would feel like I would be nervous as hell going in,
yeah.
with coming from a venture background. But what did you experience?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a few things. So a lot of times people say, "Oh, it's so hard, it's so hard." And I I don't know if I agree in the same way. Like my idea of what's really hard and what I'm doing now, is it difficult to raise money? I think it always is. Yeah. But when I look at like the things that in my life that really sucked, that were hard,
Mhm.
this is not one of them. So like, yes, a lot of people tell me no, but the journey is amazing. I love it. The one thing I say about venture or startups is it's an outlier business. And I think that's not talked about enough. And what I mean by that is if I meet someone and they like did perfect in high school, and they did perfect in undergrad, and they did perfect at grad school, and they've done all of this, like to me, that doesn't sound like an outlier. Like when I think of different people and I bet founders, they're like, oh, I did Stanford undergrad, Stanford B school, or this. I'm like, you sound middle of the road. Like you sound like a very smart person, sure. And I think you would be like an amazing partner at McKinsey. But like, do I think that you're like this radical thinker that's gonna think outside the box and kind of like disrupt the system? I don't. And so that's the thing about VC. So a lot of times when I'm going to raise capital or even when I'm meeting with founders, I want to find a kind of that oddity. And then I also kind of tell my LPs and stuff investing in me, like, you're looking for that. Like, you're not looking for a 5x return that's safe. Like, you're looking for 1,000x return.
Mhm.
And I think we hear all the time how many companies, in the long run, like even if you look at Apple, no one wanted to back Apple. And then that changed. And then you look about Facebook did a down round and now they're $1 trillion company and Airbnb couldn't raise money. And like you see some of the emails that people sent to Brian saying like pretty much Airbnb is not the jam. And so I kind of look at it like this is not a middle of the road business. So if you're a middle of the road person, we're probably not going to align and you're probably not going to invest in me either.
Do you remember what your like very first LP meeting was like? What year was that? How did you come up with your pitch and what you were going to invest in the future? What was that experience like for you? And have
Yeah,
you ever
so
sat in on someone else's LP pitch before, prior?
so I had never sat in on anyone else's LP pitch
Oh,
before. That's a really good question. So I feel like I'm kind of like what I'd say is like running through the forest with the blindfold on. Like I've
nice.
hit a lot of trees and branches.
Okay.
I think I knew the sector I wanted to invest in
Yep.
really as I started to lean into it because I grew up. So the name Rockyard is based on the nickname of my father's business that he ran, which was like a building material supply store. So they sold granite and paving stones. And when I was young, the nickname was the Rockyard. And so I grew up around that industrial layer. And so as I got older, I intuitively, I think, was drawn to it. And what I like to say is like sometimes people fall in love with industries because their parents, like a lot of people are Red Sox fans because their dad was a Red Sox fan and that. And so these are the industries that I just really love and admire. And as I got more into VC, I've just been infinitely curious about and have like immense and deep, deep, deep respect for. So now, as I kind of figured, hey, these are the areas that I'm most interested in, and I
Okay.
think they could bring the most value in customers and all that. A lot of like building my own fund was like it was so hard to break in. Like
Yeah.
I couldn't find access to this, but then I could find access to founders. So like I
Mm.
would really vibe with founders, but again, I'm also an oddity, right? I'm the only person I know in VC that's been to prison.
Yeah, me too.
Um, I'm like the first formally incarcerated MIT Sloan MBA ever. I
Yeah.
was
I
the
love that
first
you're still like wearing the shirt everywhere.
all yeah, but all of these things, right? It was like kind of the first and like, but this is a 1 out of 50,000 chance. And so like that's
That's
what
amazing.
I tell LPs too. I'm like, yo, like, do I have a chance? Like, is it rare? And they're like, it's rare. And I'm like, but this is the business of the rare. Like, that's what we're here for. We're looking for that 1 in a million company. And so, like, wouldn't you like to back someone that you think is just like a total outlier because they're going to bring different thinking to? And some people don't go for it. And what I've found is those just aren't my people. So what
Mhm.
I tell founders too is like, don't convince the skeptics, like try to find the believers, like find people that have made money in your sector, find people that believe your sector is going to grow huge. And that's not everybody. And I think that's okay. And it took me a while to figure that out. Like some people are, I can do anything and they're just never going to invest in me.
Hmm. Yeah. And I think that, there are definitely a lot of founders who find themselves in those situations or those, forks in the road. And it's really,
Yeah.
really tough because you have no one to tell you that. A lot of
It's
investors
so tough.
have, I know,
Right.
a lot of investors have ways to be able to mentor or help their founders, whether they've invested in these founders or not, by providing personal experiences, by providing them guidance, and really benefiting from their past. So I was able to help founders just through being an exited founder, just being like, okay, well, these are the kind of obstacles I went through. This is how you negotiate with, let's say, Chinese manufacturers in these ways, very specific things, right?
Yeah.
What is it about your past from living on the streets, or going in a prison, or something in your personal life that you have remembered? Hey, this is an anecdote that I've shared with a founder, and this was really helpful to them. And why did they find this to be relatable or helpful?
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question. I think when I look at founders and I meet founders, I think we all have individual superpowers. And
Okay.
so, and I think that's for everybody. And the first thing I try to do is try and figure out like what is that founder's superpower. So a lot of times, for instance, if I'm going to try and work with one of our portfolio company on sales, I prefer if they can record a few of their sales calls and I can listen. Meaning like, hey, what's your approach? What's your vibe? What's your style? What's your strongest asset? And then how can I help you amplify that? I think I'm heavily opposed to like, hey, this is what worked for me, so this is what you should do. Just because like if that was the case, I never would have gone to MIT or LSE because there was nobody else that it worked for before.
Okay.
Right. And so, like, I'm very much, again, I think of it like an outlier thing. It's like, you know, Sydney, you have superpowers that I don't have. Like you said, hey, I'm going to be in New York. I'm going to watch my friend's cat so I can stay there. I'm allergic to cats, so I can't lean into that superpower.
You should
Whereas,
just
like,
do it.
you can, and that gives you an edge that I don't have. And so, the key for me is not to like curate the founders in my image. It's trying to figure out what their superpower is and where within my network I can find leverage points. So
Mhm.
like, hey, if you're approaching it through X, Y, and Z, how can I help amplify your X, Y, and Z? And so I kind of do that because I think the greatest founders I think are just intuitive. I think they have crazy amounts of grit, and I do my best to not over index, meaning like I think sometimes in life we like to support people who are more like ourselves. because
Yeah.
we're like, oh, I like that quality. It's like, yeah, because it's just like you
What
know?
about you?
Yeah. And so what I'm trying to look for really is like, do people have unique insights? And then do they have unique talents that like really works for them? And a lot of times you can look at it in like a sports anecdote where it's like you have three players that are all exceptional, but they play different positions and they play differently,
Okay.
right? And or maybe leadership styles or coaching styles. And so for me, I think my style is like, hey, find the right people and then allow them to kind of do their thing and feel how I can empower those things. Because I think sometimes when I say, hey, this is how I do it, there's certain magic that we bring. And for instance, like even like in an instance where I lived in the Middle East for 6 years, and for me to give anecdotes on how to do business in the Middle East, it's hard for them to replicate the
Yeah.
relationships quickly, right? I'm like, yo, I understand the nuance. And so it's like, hey, how do I think you should do it? Well, how do you think you should do it? Are you comfortable with this? Are you comfortable with that? And I found it's I think the founders that I really like and I'm drawn to are people that are pretty high EQ. So they have like a really strong sense of self-awareness
Mm.
and they're really good at what I'd say is fast feedback loops and they're honest with themselves. So like if they're doing something and they know it's not working, they'll quickly assess and an example that I try to think of is if you're pitching and you get the same set of questions over and over,
Okay.
that's what you should answer first going forward. Because
Okay.
that's where
That's
like
probably
the
what you left
lack,
out. Yeah.
that's where the lack of clarity is. Like
Right.
you have multiple people asking about that, which means like you're not defining it well. And so I found that like really good founders like will run into that battle kind of head on. They'll be like, hey, as we get into this, the question most people ask us is X. So
Yeah.
let me just start by saying this is how I address that. And
Okay.
then kind of building from there and then iterating over time.
I love that. I love that. It's true. Like I've actually read a pitch deck like 3 times, not knowing what the problem
It happens a lot. And I think,
is.
yeah, it happens a lot. And I think, some people are not good at giving feedback. I think we've all had times where like people tell us something and we're like, no, 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 no.
It's
And I
so
think
easy to be in love
that's,
with your product, though.
it's so easy. And I'll hear sometimes where it's like people are like, man, I've been raising for 2 years and it's not working. And it's like, at some point you have to step back and have an honest assessment like, hey, one, is there something here that's unfundable? Is there a communication issue? Because what I tell people is like the minute people think they can really make money from you or your company, there's so much capital out there. And I also see it like as an investor, like with LP capital and that if I'm not getting people to convert, I have to have an honest conversation. Now, am I only talking to LPs that do fund two and fund three? Okay, that could be a problem. Am I only talking to LPs that are interested in Web three? Well, I'm not Web three, so that could be a problem. Or is there something else, and how can I kind of run into that head first?
Hmm. Absolutely. I know that, your fund Rockyard is investing in very early stage founders.
Yeah.
As you did a career shift into venture, you could have chosen any kind of fund, really. And so why did you choose to invest in pre-seed and seed? Was it the size of the fund kind of a thing? Was it a logistic thing, or was it something that you specifically wanted for a different reason?
Yeah, so I think one of the things we hear most is like your fund size is your fund strategy. I think there's truth to that, but I also think this is an outlier business.
Mhm.
So it's like you have funds that like invested in one super decacorn and it returned the fund, and they're like talking about fund structure, but you have a ton of other people that pass through that. And so I think like there's so much to chance with that I think it's almost scary when you do it and you run the math. I think that's where it's like, hey, you have to figure out, hey, what's your strategy? Where do you think you add value? And what I would say is like, how can you influence the outcomes the most? So some people are like, hey, I have 300 million, so I'm going to do series A and B because that's my fund size and fund strategy. to me, I would be like, okay, well, can you influence it the most at Series A and Series B?
Yeah.
So for me, when I think of where I have the most influence, where I can hopefully inform the outcomes, of course, my fund strategy, we're small, we do pre-seed and seed. But what I'm really trying to do is I'm trying to help founders at the earliest stages lock in their first, one, two, or three enterprise and large corporate clients. And so that's where I think like I
Great.
can add a ton of value is helping build that sales pipeline.
Mhm.
Now at Series B, what they're building is probably complete, not probably, it is completely different. They're doing like replicatable sales cycles, stronger like operational teams, different geographies, building up satellite offices, like all sorts of different stuff that I quite frankly don't know as well. And I don't think that's as much of a superpower. And
Yeah.
so, of course, my fund size is my strategy, but the fund size and the strategy was based on a unique skill set that I think I could do better than other people.
Hmm. Okay. So I've been reading a few articles on you before I actually saw you speak on stage, which was amazing. And so I was one of the people in the New York train system that were like looking for signal because things were not loading. So one of them was about you announcing your fund, which was really great. What surprised me is what I wanted to ask you about. So what surprised me was that most people announced their fund and then they announced, let's say, a different number than what they raised. Usually that number is like much greater. You actually were oddly transparent about what you were thinking of raising and then what you actually raised, which was a little bit less, right? And
Yeah.
so you volunteered this information, which I have
Yeah.
never seen before. Why?
Yeah. So I think that one, there's two things. So like a lot of times when you do a first close or you kind of start, you have like a target and then you build up to it.
For sure.
And so, I'm hoping by the end of my fundraise, I hit or exceed that target.
Okay.
I also, I'm just not there yet. What I would say, and this is like me, like the prison kid coming out, like a tiger doesn't need to prove he's a tiger. Like I don't need to
What does
pretend
that mean?
meaning like I think there's a lot of people in the space with fragile egos. To
That's
me, like, hey,
all
I'm
I gave.
targeting 10 million. I so far I've closed two. Like that's the truth. You know
I
what I'm
read
saying?
that. I was like, wait, I need to refresh this. This must have been a typo.
Yeah, and so it's like, hey, but the main thing I wanted different founders to know is like, hey, we're open for business, we're deploying checks, we're writing checks, we're doing that, and at the same time, I'm raising more. So now, we're up a little higher, and we're
Awesome.
doing that, and so it's going. But I kind of just like, hey, this is where I'm at. I found that in the long run, authenticity, I think, counts for more than anything.
Yes. So the authenticity strategy is working, it seems.
I think so. And I also think like, when I say the tiger doesn't need to prove he's a tiger, I see a lot of people out there who are so concerned with how they appear to other people. And
Yeah.
I understand we're all creatures of society and we want to be liked, we want to be admired, we want to be respected. And I want all of those things too. What I think that there's power in more so is the toughness of vulnerability and being like, hey, yeah, and there's certain times where like someone asks, well, what about this? And I'm like, well, you know what? I don't think I have that figured out yet. And that's where I think it goes back to the founder journey. What worked for me may not work for you. Like that's okay. Like let's figure out, hey, where does Sydney fly? And how can I help Sydney fly? And how can I trust Sydney when Sydney says, hey, Daniel, this is what I need as a founder. And so like really what I'm trying to say is like at the end of the day, like my goal with Rockyard is one, respect the hell out of the founder journey. Meaning like, yo, every person who comes, whether we back you or not, like I fucking respect you. And what you're doing is such a monumental task. And it takes so much courage that I want you to know that, like, hey, you have my respect. And what I'm going to give you is my authentic self and respect in return. That's like my reciprocation. And then for the fund, I want to invest in signature deals, meaning like I hope that in 5 or 10 years, you go to my website and people are like, wow, I know that company. Like that was a company that changed industry.
Yeah.
And so those are the two things that like are the most important. Like if I hire someone, I'm like, hey, the most important thing is like whether we like the company and we're going to back it or not, like we have to respect the founder journey because like it's so hard for these people who are a lot of times leaving jobs, taking this huge risk, going out their own, doing something that's such a monumental task. And so that's number one. And then two is like, how do we get into the best deals in the world with the most amazing founders in the world?
Hmm. Yeah. I definitely know what it's like to fall in love with a founder and then be like, how can I help you? I don't even know if it's part of our thesis or not. I just feel like I have so much respect for what you were doing because it's true. Like, when I was a founder, all my friends were founders. And what we tell other people, especially investors, is only the tip of the iceberg because
Yeah.
that's all you can actually do. And it was in a kind of a world at the time too, where telling them anything else would be like an absurd act. Like, why are
Yeah.
you doing that? Why are you unloading on this person? Like, why? Like they can't help you in these ways. And so
It's
yeah,
so
like
hard, man. It's so hard.
it is. You can't guess what they're really going through, even if they're trying to tell you.
Yeah, agreed.
For sure.
100%. So that's what I'm trying to do. I feel like some days I do it better than others,
I'm
but
sure you
hopefully on the grand scheme of things, it's,
do great.
net positive.
You're gonna over index on this, I'm sure, at
I
the end
hope so.
of all of
I'm trying,
your
man.
fun 100.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much, Daniel, for spending this time with us. And thank you, everyone, for joining in on another episode of Unlocking Venture Capital.
See you later.